All right, everybody. So today we're going to be practicing watercolor. We're going to be doing a lot of gradient blends, analogous blends, and we're going to work with wet on dry and wet on wet. There's also going to be a couple texturing techniques that we're going to show you. So just follow along. Make sure that you're doing the same colors that we're doing. And go ahead, and I want you to start. You should have this gridded already by following the directions in the PowerPoint, but you don't have these things written down yet. So go ahead and write these down. Just pause the video real quick and do that, and then come back and push play. All right, so now that you have all of these descriptors written down, you know exactly what colors to use and what we're going to be doing with them. So over here, you're going to see analogous, and it says yellow, orange, red, okay? All right, so what do you need for this project? Well, we have our grid. You're going to obviously need your watercolor palette, brand new. You do have a brush in that palette that looks like this, and it has white bristles. This is a brand new brush, and it is a little bit thinner than the other brush that you're going to find in your pack. So I'm going to use this bigger brush today. Actually, I'll use a little bit of both, but this guy's going to be for a lot of those big blending, like those big gradients and big washes, versus this one that you can get a little bit more detail out of, okay? For today, we're only going to use the black once, but please stay away from the black and the brown other than that one little bit of black that we're going to do for our gradient with black up here. Okay, the other thing that we need is a cup of water. Okay, if you're at home, you're going to have to trade this guy out probably halfway through. In class, you're going to have 2 cups of water. Okay, you're going to have paper towel. This is going to be to wipe your brush off with, as well as creating our texture, our blotting texture later on. And then the last thing that you're going to need is some salt. So you want coarse salt, not table salt. So I actually used a salt grinder to get this. You can see it's a little chunkier. So this is what the salt grinder looks like. But at home, if you don't have any of this coarse salt, it's okay. You can use table salt. It's just not going to have like the super desired effect that we're going for with the salt texture, but it'll still create some cool stuff. All right. So we're going to go one by one, starting up the upper left-hand corner and making our way over. So again, just try to keep it in its own sections. We are going to be using a lot of water, so your paper might wrinkle up. That's okay. Do not stress. All right. So I'm going to dive in here. The first thing that you want to do is really saturate your brush in the water. So right now I'm sticking my large brush with the brown bristles into the water. And I want to saturate the color that I'm going to use first. So I'm going to go ahead and do green first. That's what I have labeled up here. So I'm taking a lot of water out of my cup, getting as much as I can on the brush. And I'm going to go ahead and start saturating that color in my palette. So you do have to mix your brush around a good amount. You can even go and grab some more water so then you know that you're plenty prepared. It's really hard when you're doing big washes like this, and then all of a sudden you run out of paint and you have to re-saturate it. So my suggestion is get it really saturated to start with and then go from there. If some bristles fall off, these are brand new brushes. Don't panic. It's not a big deal. We can kind of pop them off the paper once it dries. Don't worry, it's not you. It's definitely the brush. All right, so that's nice and saturated. You can see I've got a lot of paint to work with right there, okay? All right, now I'm going to say this too while I have this in front of you. This section here, your lid, you're always more than welcome to use this area to blend some colors. So like if I wanted to do a yellow green, for example, because I don't have my intermediate colors in here, I can go here and actually mix them together to create my yellow green and then scoop from there. But you just always want to make sure to wipe off your lid at the end of the day, so that way you can kind of keep using it. And you are going to see, like I said, no intermediates, but you have your primaries, your red, your yellow, and your blue. Okay, I know this blue looks like black. It's not. Okay, and then you have your intermediates, your orange, your green, and your violet. Okay. Okay, so let's dive on in. I've got plenty of water in here. I'm going to leave my palette here so you can see it. Okay, and then I'm going to start by doing just a gradient with my green watercolor. So I'm going to go from dark down to light. And as I make that transition, I'm going to have to add more water as I go. So when we want to create gradients with watercolor, it's really just making sure that you're doing really saturated color versus really wetted down and thinned down color. So I'm starting to kind of make my way down. I'm going to go ahead and dip my brush into my cup, get a little extra water. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna wipe my brush off a little bit on my paper towel. So again, guys, don't be afraid to use up this paper towel. So I'm wiping it off a little bit. I wanna get some of that color off. Dipping my brush back in my water cup. Spreading it a little bit further. Same thing, I'm gonna really wipe off my brush now. Try to get that color out of there. Grab a little bit more water and go as light as I can down here. Okay, so you can see it makes a huge difference wiping off your brush. You can even go back and swipe over the top if you want it to be even lighter. So I'm literally swiping with my brush, wiping my brush off. Watercolor can be pretty dang forgiving, so it's still wet, right? So I can come back and I can blend this out a little bit better. So it does take a few minutes for it to dry. So if you need to make adjustments, you have time to. Primarily on your guys' final project, we're gonna be doing a lot of washes like this, so practicing it is gonna make you a lot more comfortable. All right, so now you can see my transition, right? Going from dark into light. All right, so there is my gradient. Just doing a flat wash, okay? You're gonna hear me say that once in a while because there's a difference between doing a flat wash versus doing like a color splatter wash, and I'll show you the difference, okay? So I've got my green gradient. So let's go ahead and do another gradient. This time we're gonna use violet, and we're actually gonna use a little bit of black into the violet, but we're still gonna create the gradient that we did here. So it's gonna pretty much go from dark blackish violet into light violet. We don't have white as an option in these watercolor palettes. If you guys ever use watercolor tubes or something like that, you're gonna notice that there is a white, which is pretty handy. But we don't need it for this purpose, so that's okay. I'm going to wipe off my brush really well. So I'm gonna dip it in my water, and I'm trying to get all of that color off because I don't want to combine my violet and my green together. I want it to just be pure violet. So dip in the brush, use your paper towel, and wipe it off really well. Okay, so now I need to go ahead and saturate my violet. Okay, that's gonna be this one that is next to your brown. Don't confuse these two. I know it looks really dark, but I promise you that is violet. So I'm adding in water, getting some real good saturation there. Then we're also gonna be using the black, okay? So we wanna be careful how much water we add into that black section. We just need a little bit in there, okay? So I'm gonna barely brush any in. Black goes really far, just like with any other medium that we use. I'm sure you've heard your teachers say that a lot, okay? So I'm gonna wipe off my brush a little bit. Okay, and the way I'm gonna start this, instead of starting with black and going into the purple, I'm actually gonna put the violet down first. So I'm gonna grab my violet, okay, and I'm gonna do the gradient pretty much the exact same way I did with my green. I'm gonna start all the way at the top here. Again, going really, really saturated with color, making sure it's nice and dark. Okay, grabbing a little extra water. Bringing it down a little bit further. This time I'm gonna grab some water and wipe off my brush. So I'm getting some of that color off. Okay, wiping off my brush again, a little extra water. Okay. So there's my gradient, just like what I did with the green, okay? And again, I can come in and kind of clean a little bit of it up. It depends on the paper you're using too, guys. If you're using thicker paper that has a little more of a tooth, it'll be a little bit more consistent versus a paper that's really, really slick, like printer paper. Okay, so I've got my gradient. Now, I wanna add a little bit of like a shade in there. We're gonna add a little bit of black up here to make it even darker. So I'm gonna actually start all the way at the top here, brush in a little bit of black, and kind of blend it in with my purple that I already have down. If I started with my black and then I went in with my purple, it's gonna start getting really muddy and it'd probably mess up my entire gradient. You'd see a little haze of black in all of it. We don't want that. We just want a nice shade where the purple is the darkest, okay? And I apologize, guys. You're gonna hear me say purple and violet a lot. It's the same color. I slip up a lot. Okay, so again, I'm gonna slowly make that transition down, keeping that black a little bit blended. So now I'm gonna grab water, wipe off my brush. All right. So it's gonna kind of look like that, okay? Okay, So, and you can see too, guys, these gradients are not like perfect. Watercolor doesn't really want to be. It kind of wants to do what it wants to do. So you got to let it do what it does best. And that's, you know, these awesome washes, and it creates great texture. So don't fear that. Ultimately, you kind of want that texturing in there. Just like when we were using those oil pastels, right? Use it for what it does best. And that's why we're doing these washes. Okay, so from there, we're gonna go ahead and go to our color blend. So we're really gonna need to wash off our brush. Grab one of your cups. They shouldn't be super soaked in color yet. Okay, so I'm using my brush, really rinsing it out. Using that paper towel, gonna wipe my brush off really well. Okay, and then I'm gonna go ahead and saturate my yellow. If you see color show up in your yellow when you do this, that's a big red flag. Make sure that you get the color off of your brush first, okay? You always want to start with your lightest color and work your way to your darkest. So I'm about to do a color blend with yellow, orange, and red, okay? If you try to go backwards and put yellow into a darker color like red, it's not gonna love it. You're gonna have to go like super heavy with the yellow. So anytime you do watercolor, always start with whatever the lightest hue is, okay? And that's pretty much always gonna be your yellow. Just be really careful with it. Okay, so I've got all of my paint saturated, my yellow, my orange, and my red. Okay, wiping off my brush a little bit, making sure I'm ready. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead. Sorry guys, I'm gonna try to keep this palette right there. There we go. Okay, so I'm here. I'm gonna go yellow, orange to red. So yellow on the top, down to red. Okay, grab my yellow. Again, I'm gonna stay pretty saturated this time. I don't really want to create that gradient. I'm gonna blend these. So try to do a good amount of color. Okay, so I'm gonna go just over a third of the way. All right, wiping off my brush, grab a little more water. Okay, now I'm gonna do my orange, and I'm gonna lightly blend over the top of my yellow here, okay? So I'm gonna leave this line for now, and then I'll kind of come back and blend it a little bit more in a second. Okay, now that I have my orange down, I'm gonna grab a little extra water and come back and blend that line out. Okay, so you can see I'm just brushing back over the top of it, and it's gonna start blending. And what happens is you're actually creating that intermediate color, right? You're creating your yellow-orange. It's pretty nifty. Now, if something happens and you're like, I have this weird white patch, it's okay. I'm gonna come back, grab a little extra yellow, blend it back down. Okay, same deal. I'm gonna grab a little extra orange and blend it back up. Okay, so you can keep going back and forth. It's pretty nifty. All right, so there we go. It's a pretty good blend. Okay, and then I'm gonna take my red. Same thing. I'm gonna start by overlapping my orange. Ooh, and you can see it's already getting this cool bleeded effect right there where they're hitting. Super cool. Okay, and I'm gonna keep going back and forth over the top until I get that nice red-orange color. Intermediate, okay. And this paper is sucking up a lot of the paint. So to be honest with you guys, I would keep adding color back in. So now I'm putting some orange back in there, okay. You might have to keep doing that. Again, based off of the paper that we're using, it really makes a huge difference if you have to like keep reapplying color or not. So this is the paper you guys are gonna be using for your final, which is why I'm doing it for this test run, okay, because we need to make sure that we're comfortable with it. Okay, there we go. So we've got our analogous color blend. And again, you can see how cool it is. It really creates a lot of texture as you're going too. Okay, from there, we're gonna jump down to the color blend. Again, we're doing analogous, but we're gonna do wet on wet this time. This is super fun. All right, so first thing we're gonna do is actually wet down the entire square with our brush, okay? So I'm gonna grab, again, your water cup shouldn't be super saturated with color yet, okay? And we're gonna be using red, violet, and blue. So if you have the cup that has a little bit of the purple in it, the violet, it's not gonna make a huge difference. So go ahead and grab that one and go ahead and start creating a little water wash over the top of this entire square. I'm adding a good amount of water. The more water you add, the cooler this effect is gonna look. All right, so now we're gonna do violet, red, and blue. So my red is already saturated, my violet is already saturated, so I just need to go ahead and do my blue. I'm gonna add a little bit more into my red as well. All right, guys, now remember, analogous, right? That means that they're next to each other on the color wheel. So I've got my beautiful sunset colors here, my yellow, orange, and red. Now we're gonna do red, violet, blue. If you were to do complements, for example, like green and red, and they blended together, bad things would happen, okay? It would start turning this gross grayish brown color, so don't do that. Okay, so my entire thing is wetted down, and now I'm gonna go ahead and start with my lightest color in that batch, which would be my red. So go ahead and get your brush really soaked in with that red. Okay, I'm kind of twisting my brush and stuff, making sure that it's really, really saturated. Okay, all right, and then I'm gonna go ahead and start adding little blots of red. And you're gonna see it makes this really, really cool effect where it starts kind of bleeding out like that. Again, watercolor likes to have texture, right? Just like we were dealing with the oil pastels. Okay, so that's probably enough red. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and grab my violet. Okay, because this is, you know, if we look at the color wheel, it goes red, violet, blue, so that's the order that I'm gonna go ahead and do these in. It doesn't really matter what order you do them in, guys, because ultimately they're analogous, right? So they can blend together happily. Okay, so now I've got my violet on there with my red. The last one is gonna be blue. And I'm kind of strategically trying to put it in spots that there's still white space. So then it kind of fills up this whole area. So you can see, it almost creates this tie-dye effect, right? Pretty cool looking. There you go. And when it dries too, it actually will have like even a different look. So if it pulls up and stuff, don't worry about it. Let it happen. You'll be very impressed with the results, okay? Okay, so that one was super easy, right? Now we're gonna do the blotting texture using the paper towel. As far as like what colors and stuff you wanna do for the blotting and the salt, or like what kind of washes you wanna do, right? If it's wet on wet or wet on dry, it doesn't really matter. I'll go ahead, we'll play around with doing one of each. So let's go ahead for the blotting one. Let's go ahead and do like we did up here. We're gonna do a flat wash with the wet on dry. And I'm gonna actually go from violet, so dark violet into light violet, and then dark red into light red, okay? So again, you can kind of do anything, but again, we know violet and red will blend together, but we're gonna try to create two gradients coming at each other. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with my red, and I'm gonna get it really saturated and go from the bottom. So I'm going as dark as I can. Okay. Washing off my brush a little bit. Again, use your paper towel to grab the paint off, right? So I'm putting my brush in the cup and then I'm taking my paper towel and wiping it off. Grab a little bit more water and spread it up, okay? It's about halfway, should be good, okay? So there's my gradient for my red. And then I'm gonna do the opposite with my violet. You do have to act a little bit quicker on this one because we are gonna be blotting with the paper towel. So don't overthink this. So I got my really saturated purple area. I just wiped off my brush again. Okay, wiping off my brush again, grab a little extra water, and then let these two kind of blend together organically there in the middle. Okay, so here's the fun part. We get to do some blotting now with the paper towel. So you're gonna take your paper towel, crumple it up. You guys might need a new dry one, okay? So I'm gonna crumple it like this. Don't be pretty about it. Okay, take this guy and just start blotting. It's okay if these two colors mix together because again, they're analogous, right? That's why we chose them. So don't worry if your purple gets onto the red or the red gets onto the purple. Okay. Now this paper sucks up this color really quick. Again, this is why we're practicing it. So I didn't get as much of that texture as I could if I was using like watercolor paper, but it still creates this cool overlap, and it does create this sense of like, you know, that color being taken away a little bit. So the quicker you do the blotting, the heavier the texture is gonna look, okay? So if I were to redo my red, for example, okay, and I were to act upon it really quickly, so I'm gonna add some more color on there, okay? And I take this guy and I start blotting a little bit quicker, you're gonna actually see a little bit more of that texture. So when you're doing this, guys, just knowing how fast the paper sucks up the color, maybe do the red blot and then do the purple separate and then blot it, instead of doing it all at once, unless you really liked the way that it looked. I mean, if you like it just being spread with a tiny bit of texture, that's okay too. So now that I did that, I'm gonna do the same thing with my purple so that they match a little bit better. If you're anything like me, you'll appreciate that. Okay, so I added a little more purple back in. Now I'm gonna go ahead, crumple up my paper towel and blot. There you go. So it looks pretty cool. Okay, done with that one. The last one that we're gonna do is our salt texture, okay? Now the salt texture, all you're gonna be doing is putting down a wash and sprinkling your salt over the top of it. Pretty easy. You gotta let that salt sit, so don't try to like wipe it off right away. We have to let it completely dry and then you kind of flake it off. So don't panic if you're like, whoa, my salt is totally stuck to my paper. You come back to it the next day and it'll be ready to take off. Okay, so for this one, let's go ahead and do another wet on wet like we did over here. Okay, but we're gonna just do like 2 colors like we did here. And we can even create some stripes with it. So we can be a little bit more strategic about how we do the wet on wet. And really, in order to do that, you just have to make sure that you add a little less water than we did last time. So we went pretty nuts to create that super tie-dyed look. This time we're gonna apply just a little bit of water and then go from there, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and do green and blue for this one because I feel like we just did green up here and we don't have anywhere else. So let's go ahead and do some green and blue. Again, they're next to each other on the color wheel, very important because this watercolor bleeds together. So don't do complements next to each other. That's a big no-no. When you guys do your final project, you're gonna have windows to work in. So you could totally get away with doing like analogous colors within each window and then complements in windows that are beside each other. So that's kind of cool. All right, so again, I'm grabbing water with my brush. I really wiped it off first to make sure there's no extra color left from the last one that we did. And I'm gonna go ahead and put down just a little bit of water this time. Still covering the whole box, but I'm not layering up. Okay. Now we're gonna use blue and green. Both of my colors are still saturated. I'm gonna go ahead and start with the green because it's lighter than the blue. Again, it doesn't really matter in this situation. Really, the only time you have to be careful with that is with the yellow. But you saw even up here, I could go back with the yellow again. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start with my green, and I'm gonna just do some stripes going across. And you can see I'm just barely dragging my brush, okay? Pretty cool looking. I just got that out of my brush, wiping it off, dipping back in the water, and now I'm gonna grab some of the blue. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna add a little more water here. You can always go back and add water back in too if there's some little spots. You just don't wanna go crazy because it'll change the texture of it. All right, so that's kind of my overall effect that I got when I did it. When we sprinkle the salt, again, it's gonna create this really cool, almost like a, it's almost gonna suck up the color and take it away from the paper. So it's almost like subtracting the color. It's kind of cool. So I have some little white gaps, that's totally okay. And I'm actually gonna create more with my salt. So it's still wet. So I'm gonna start sprinkling this on there and you're gonna instantly see these little starburst effects. Especially, like I said, the coarser the salt, the cooler the effect. And you have to make sure you do this when it's really, really wet, guys. If you try to do it when it's dry, it's not gonna work. So you can see the salt is actually soaking up the color. So when I brush this off, it's gonna leave some really cool, like little white starbursts, almost like little white stars in it. Okay, and you can see up here too, where it was really wet, it created that cool starburst thing even in the color. I didn't have quite as much wetness here, so it didn't have that effect. But if you try to go backwards, which I've seen students do, they take their water and try to go back over the top of the salt. That is bad. Don't do that. Just let it be, okay? Because if you go back over the top, it will mess up what you've already done. So there you go. That's kind of what we're going for. So I will take away the salt tomorrow, but ultimately you just need to let this guy dry. Your teachers are going to check you off for this in their own way. Some people might have you email it, some people might have you show in person, or turn it into Google Classroom. Kind of depends on the teacher. All right, guys, as far as cleaning up goes, right, your palettes, again, if you did any blending up here, make sure to take a paper towel and wipe it off. Okay, the color pieces here, you can see that they're still really wet. You're going to want to make sure, close this lid tight and try to keep it level instead of tilting it. If you tilt it, they might run into each other, okay? It's okay to keep your brush in here if you'd like to, but you don't have to. So I've got my palette, I've got my 2 brushes, and then always, 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 guys, rinse out your cups, okay, so that we can use them again. All right, that's it, everybody. Good luck and have fun.